Greetings, viewers. Welcome to our deep dive into the most brutal battles of human history. For centuries, the Indian subcontinent was ruled by pure muscle and giant beasts of war. These living, armored tanks, the war elephants, crushed any enemy foolish enough to oppose them. But in 1526, a small nomadic army arrived, bringing a frightening new magic. Gunpowder and roaring bronze cannons were about to change the entire course of human warfare. The wealthy Delhi Sultanate reigned supreme over the vast plains of northern India for years. Sultan Ibrahim Lodi commanded an empire of immense riches and a deadly force. According to ancient texts, his royal army boasted over 100,000 loyal soldiers. This massive infantry line stretched across the horizon, armed with spears and heavy shields. But the true terror of his military might was not the countless men marching today. It was a devastating unit of armored war elephants, bred for pure destruction. Covered in thick plates of steel, these gigantic beasts were virtually immune to archery. Their massive tusks were often fitted with poisoned iron swords to slice through any cavalry. For generations, no opposing army had ever successfully stopped a full stampede. They would simply trample enemy formations into the dust, shattering all of their morale. Sultan Lodi, sitting proudly on his majestic howdah, felt absolutely invincible. He looked down upon his vast military machine, believing that numbers guaranteed victory. Historical records state that Lodi completely dismissed the rising threat from the mountains. He believed his traditional methods of warfare would easily crush any barbarian force. This fatal arrogance blinded the Sultan to the rapid technological changes happening. The Indian army doctrine remained stagnant, relying heavily on sheer animal strength. They lacked modern tactical formations, fighting mainly as a massive, uncoordinated mob. Their heavy chainmail armor offered excellent protection, but slowly hindered their movements. Lodi's commanders strictly followed outdated plans, unable to adapt to sudden changes. They assumed the upcoming battle would be just another routine defeat of the weak nomads. The wealthy lords and nobles of Delhi eagerly anticipated a glorious triumph. But out on the dusty plains of Panipat, a completely different predator was waiting. The air was thick with tension as the morning sun beat down ruthlessly on the dry, cracked earth. The mighty elephants shifted restlessly, their heavy armor clanking in the oppressive heat. Thousands of colorful silk banners fluttered in the wind, a vibrant display of supreme power. Every soldier in the Delhi army was fully convinced today would end in total victory. They sharpened their ancient weapons, completely unaware that a new era of ruin would begin. The sheer scale of Lodi's forces was designed to intimidate the enemy into surrender. However, the man standing across the battlefield was no ordinary tribal warlord. He was a battle-hardened survivor, a tactical genius who learned from bitter defeats. While the Indian army trusted their giant beasts, the invader trusted discipline and science. The stage was perfectly set for the bloodiest military clash in South Asian history. Two completely opposite philosophies of war, were about to collide violently today. If you faced an army 10 times your size, would you retreat or rely on a dangerous weapon? The answer to that question would ultimately determine the final fate of the subcontinent. Enter Zahir-ud-Din Muhammad Babur, a fierce descendant of the mighty Genghis Khan. Babur was a brilliant nomadic leader who lost his kingdom but never lost his ambition. His invading army was shockingly small, numbering barely 15,000 exhausted men. To the Indian generals, this tiny invading force looked like a foolish suicide mission. If Babur fought using conventional medieval tactics, his entire army would be crushed. But Babur carried a brilliant modern mindset, forged through years of bitter survival and exile. He understood that sheer muscle could be easily defeated by superior engineering. Many modern scholars argue that Babur's true genius lay in adopting foreign technology. He carefully studied the Ottoman Empire, the true masters of early modern warfare. From them, he acquired the ultimate equalizer: heavy bronze cannons and deadly matchlock firearms. These weapons were completely unknown in northern India, possessing terrifying power. Babur understood the critical importance of battlefield preparation and strong defense. Instead of a foolish frontal charge, he ordered his men to construct an impenetrable fortress. They tied hundreds of heavy bullock carts together, using thick leather ropes to form a barricade. This wagon fort provided an excellent physical shield for his highly vulnerable shooters. Behind these sturdy carts, the skilled Ottoman artillerymen positioned their heavy bronze cannons. Gaps were purposely left in the defensive line to allow the swift cavalry to sally forth. Babur's men worked tirelessly through the night, digging deep trenches to protect their exposed, weak flanks. They covered the hidden traps with loose branches and dry dirt to break the momentum of a charge. The nomadic warriors possessed a level of strict discipline that the Delhi army lacked. Every single man knew exactly where to stand and when to execute his designated role. Babur stood calmly behind the wooden walls, his sharp eyes surveying the plains with cold precision. He was not intimidated by the distant trumpeting of the massive elephants. He knew that his primitive firearms required immense patience. They had to fire at the perfect time. The heavy matchlock guns took a dangerously long time to reload, making every volley crucial. If the Indian elephants managed to breach the wooden carts, the entire army would fall. The tension in the camp was agonizing as they watched the massive enemy approach. Gunners carefully measured their black powder, their hands steady despite the overwhelming odds. They placed burning, slow matches near the touch holes, ready to unleash hell upon the arrogant Sultan. Babur's elite mounted archers waited patiently on the wings, their bows ready to rain down fire. This was not a fight for land. It was a desperate fight for ultimate survival. The sun climbed higher into the scorching sky, illuminating the stark contrast between the armies. On one side, an ocean of medieval armor and giant beasts steeped in ancient tradition. On the other, a small, desperate band of survivors holding the deadly keys to the future. The silence broke as Sultan Lodi raised his jeweled sword, signaling the massive final charge. On April 21st, the earth violently shook as the massive Delhi army surged forward. A terrifying roar erupted from 100,000 throats, drowning out the loud battle drums. At the front of the charge were the armored war elephants, moving like unstoppable mountains of steel. They kicked up a massive cloud of choking brown dust, blinding the defenders and hiding the danger. The ground trembled violently under their heavy feet, but Babur's disciplined men held their ground. The Indian infantry followed closely behind, their spears glinting fiercely under the harsh sunlight. Sultan Lodi sat high upon his beast, completely confident that his enemies would soon break. But as the giant elephants closed the distance, they encountered Babur's wall of heavy carts. The massive animals hesitated before the wooden spikes, confusing the charging soldiers behind them. This sudden halt created a deadly traffic jam, packing thousands of Indian soldiers tightly together. It was exactly the perfect target that Babur had been patiently waiting for all morning. With a swift drop of his command sword, he finally ordered the Ottoman artillery to unleash hell. The heavy bronze cannons fired simultaneously, erupting in a blinding flash of cinematic red fire. A deafening roar tore across the battlefield, a sound completely alien to the Indian land. Thick gunpowder smoke instantly filled the hot air, turning the bright day into a dark nightmare. The primitive matchlock infantry aimed carefully and fired devastating volleys into the crowded ranks. Iron projectiles smashed through the dense formations, easily piercing the traditional chainmail armor. But the most crucial impact of the explosive noise was not on the frightened infantrymen. The deafening thunder of the cannons completely shattered the nerves of the armored war elephants. These highly trained beasts had never experienced the terrifying shock of exploding gunpowder before. Panic quickly seized the majestic animals, turning them from disciplined weapons into wild monsters. The terrified elephants reared up on their hind legs, violently shaking their heavy wooden howdahs. The riders desperately tried to regain control, but the loud noise drove the giant beasts utterly mad. Screaming in pure terror, the armored giants suddenly turned around and fled from the blinding fire. This was the fatal moment that completely doomed the magnificent army of the Delhi Sultanate. The fleeing elephants charged directly into their own tightly packed infantry lines with brutal force. Thousands of the Sultan's loyal soldiers were brutally crushed and perished under their own living tanks. The vast advance collapsed into a tragic ruin of dust and unspeakable suffering. Sultan Lodi watched in absolute horror as his invincible vanguard destroyed his entire formation. His golden armor was quickly covered in dust, his arrogant pride replaced by sheer, frantic panic. According to historical records, the Sultan courageously tried to rally his breaking ranks together. But the chaotic stampede of the panicked elephants made any organized command completely impossible. Seeing the enemy line shatter, Babur flawlessly executed his brilliant and deadly flanking maneuver. His swift cavalry, using the famous Tulughma tactic, swept rapidly around the chaotic flanks. These elite mounted archers fired relentless volleys of deadly arrows into the trapped Indian soldiers. The massive Delhi army was now completely surrounded, caught between deadly cannons and swift cavalry. The barricade of wooden carts prevented any forward escape, trapping them in a devastating zone. The deafening roar of artillery continued to blast massive holes into the desperately struggling crowd. By late afternoon, the magnificent army of 100,000 men was completely annihilated. The battlefield of Panipat became a tragic wasteland of shattered spears and fallen giant beasts. The setting sun cast long, dramatic shadows over the dark aftermath of the historic clash. As the thick smoke slowly cleared, the true scale of the devastating carnage was finally revealed. In the center of the tragic ruin lay the fallen form of Sultan Ibrahim Lodi himself. The proud Afghan ruler had fought to the bitter end, falling alongside thousands of his loyal men. His exquisite gold-plated armor was torn and heavily stained with the dark mud of the battlefield. His jeweled sword lay broken in the dirt, perfectly symbolizing the sudden fall of his dynasty. Babur slowly walked through the sea of corpses, his own steel armor scratched and heavily battered. His face was covered in dark gunpowder soot, yet his piercing eyes burned with a majestic aura. He looked down at the fallen Sultan, understanding the heavy price paid for this historic victory. The brave prince had finally secured a permanent home for his people through fire and hot iron. Many modern scholars argue Panipat was not just a victory of better military tactics. It represented the undeniable triumph of modern engineering over sheer physical animal strength. The age of the invincible war elephant was brutally ended by the thunder of bronze cannons. Those magnificent beasts, once the ultimate weapon of kings, had become their most fatal weakness. This tragic shift in warfare permanently altered the balance of political power across the world. Babur did not simply win a single battle. He forcefully unlocked the gates to a vast continent. The victorious Mughal army proudly marched away from the horrific stench of the Panipat battlefield. They captured the wealthy city of Delhi, seizing immense treasures beyond their wildest dreams. This monumental victory laid the solid foundation for the legendary Mughal Empire in northern India. For the next 3 centuries, Babur's descendants would brilliantly rule over a vast and wealthy domain. They would build architectural wonders like the Taj Mahal, leaving an immortal cultural legacy. Yet all of that future glory was violently born in the choking dust and mud of this very field. It was born from the terrified cries of fallen beasts and the relentless fire of early cannons. History teaches us that the stubborn refusal to adapt to new technology leads to absolute ruin. Ibrahim Lodi learned this painful lesson too late, paying for arrogance with his kingdom and life. As shadows deepen over the historical plains of Panipat, the loud echoes of cannons still resonate. They serve as a grim reminder that in the brutal theater of war, innovation is the best weapon. The clash between tradition and progress was forever sealed by the fall of countless men. Babur's incredible journey from the homeless nomad to an emperor is a testament to bold vision. He brought the future to a land stubbornly anchored in the past, completely changing its destiny. The Mughal era had officially begun, forged in the fires of the deadliest battle of the century. We must always remember that the wheels of history are driven by those who dare to embrace the new. The Battle of Panipat proved that new technology will always crush outdated military force. Do you think Sultan Lodi could have won today if he adapted his ancient tactics? Tell us below. If you enjoyed this epic history deep dive, Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more.